I'm enthusiastic about the biodiesel conversation that it's time to have now. For many of us, realizing the far-off nature of a much more efficient vehicle beyond a Prius, or the opportunity to get beyond conventional fuels, biodiesel is an opportunity, a solution that's really at hand right now. So whether it's an internet-ordered online kit to create your own biodiesel, or recycling French fry oil from McDonald's, or as our guest today will describe, oil that you can grow on your farm. My thought is this is a really great opportunity for many of us to quickly move into a much more efficient fuel economy. It's interesting to note that biodiesel will add $24 billion to the US economy by 2015, and the forecast is that this will keep $13 billion domestic that otherwise would be spent on foreign oil. But drilling down a bit deeper into biodiesel, I'm not sure the familiarity with which our audience has about biodiesel, but worthwhile to note, not only when we think of a diesel vehicle, that the typical cloud of brown behind the car has really been replaced. That's kind of a thing of the past. Everything from sporty Jetta TDIs to your tractor, to even the snow grooming equipment on ski mountains like in Aspen or at Alta. There are a lot of applications for biodiesel currently. Wanted to mention that the biodiesel that's being harvested, as our panel today will talk about, is really large scale, and this goes beyond simply borrowing from French fry oil. Let's see, I'll start with Brett Earl and Logan Fisher. This is Brett and this is Logan. And they are fourth generation Montana farmers who have had a vision about how to really turn a profit on this. So this year they've completed construction of a 275,000 gallon capacity plant. And they're aiming to produce, that's the current state, but ultimately are aiming to produce 1 million gallons a year of biodiesel. And they'll share more with us about that. But when it comes to biodiesel, there's a lot that needs to be settled in terms of certification of the product, the biodiesel mechanics that are necessary, or even the business incubation lab. So at Montana State University Northern, Jessica Wendy Boy is directing the Bioenergy Innovation and Testing Center. Jessica is a Assiniboine from the Assiniboine tribe, but is living currently at the Rocky Boy tribe, which is Rocky Boy Nation, which is Cree and Chippewa. She worked previously on the White House Task Force on Energy Project Streamlining in 2003, and had previous experience at the Department of Energy. So we're in good hands to begin the conversation. I think I'll start with Jessica, if you wouldn't mind explaining a bit more about what you're up to.
Certainly. At Montana State University Northern, we have just opened our doors to our Bioenergy Innovation and Testing Center. And what that is when Northern was looking at the regional, trying to support regional economic development, we kind of looked around to see how we can increase economic development for the region. And as everyone knows, that although there's lots of economic development going on and growth going on in western Montana along the Rocky Mountain front, north central and eastern Montana is in a huge economic decline. We see more and more farmland that's entering into CRP, and we see even at Northern, Montana State University Northern, we see a lot of our students that are graduating from our programs that are leaving the region with their families, so we see a decline in the population in that area. So what we did at Northern is we looked around and we saw biodiesel kind of following Governor Schweitzer's vision for bioenergy industry for Montana, and how can we support that industry. And Northern has one of the only four-year programs in diesel technology and automotive technology, and we have a lot of linkages with industry, with the population, kind of baby boomers getting ready to retire. There's a big need for diesel mechanics, and we have linkages with Case New Holland, with Ford, with Foundation Coal, and with Kiewit and several other industries that are looking for our mechanics. And we also have had a request for industries to do some product testing, both from local developers and also on a lot of fuel additives that, we're talking about fuel that are raising in cost higher and higher and higher. In the last, 3 years, we have seen diesel go from $2 a gallon to, last summer I think we were paying $3.50 a gallon to fill up diesel vehicles, and that is a huge cost on the transportation and the construction industries. And we have a lot of fuel additives that are proclaiming that they can give us anywhere from 5 to 8% fuel efficiencies. Well, for industry that burns up, 15 million gallons of diesel in a year, 5 to 8% efficiency is big things. So we have had a lot of requests coming to Northern because of our technical expertise in the diesel industry to do some testing. So from that, we developed this Bioenergy Innovation and Testing Center. And our goal is to actually, we're establishing an ASTM certification fuel lab. And what that lab will be able to do is certify the biodiesel that is being produced, or we hope to be produced in the state of Montana at a fraction of the cost of a private lab to kind of support the developing industry for Montana. We also have a failure analysis lab to where we can do some preliminary testing of products to see, does this product work? What's it going to do to a diesel engine or an automotive engine? As my uncle, as I was, first got into biodiesel about 4 or 5 years ago on the policy, and I was in Washington, D.C. doing some development of the Energy Policy Act. And I was telling my uncle, I got all excited about biodiesel. I said, you know what? I said, Uncle, if you plant 20 acres into, sunflower or safflower or soybean or something that grows from this area, that you can power your whole farm on biodiesel. And he looked at me, he said, yeah, and I'll plug up my engines and I'll be broke down for 3 weeks with no end in sight. So you see, you have a lot of that type of attitudes towards biodiesel out there. And in some ways, maybe they're right. The last thing a farmer can afford or a trucker can afford is to be broke down, because that means it costs money every hour, every day that you're broke down during the middle of harvest, or when you have a product that needs to get to its destination. And so that's one of the things that we have been able to do at Northern. We have the technical expertise, we have the labs, and we are in the process of actually starting some of our testing as we speak. Next week we're starting some product testing on some additives, and we'll see where it goes from there.
That's great, that's great. Logan or Brett, would you like to launch in and explain about the company? I understand you have some pictures to show too.
We do?
Yeah, we do. Brett and I got together about 2 years ago and decided we were going to start a biofuels company, and the reason is in our area of Montana, again, declining populations, no growth, things like that. We needed something on our farms that we could turn into a retail product right there. We had to add value to something. We couldn't keep affording to send cheap wheat out of the area and pay the Burlington Northern and pay all the companies to get it out for us. So the cost of fuel went up, of course, and we decided to look into biofuels and subsidizing our fuel costs on our own farm, as Jessica said, growing it ourselves. So Brett and I got together and started talking about it and looking into the technology, and pretty soon it got bigger and bigger. People heard that we were talking about doing it, and they said, well, we'd be customers, and county commissioners decided that they'd want to participate too, and it just snowballed into what now is a biodiesel plant, and that's kind of where we started with that.
Should we look at the photos?
We can. Do you want me to? What we've done is we took a building up in Chester that used to make shovel sweeps for plows, and it's been abandoned for 8 years, and the city and the county own it, and we took that building and cleaned it out and put in the biodiesel plant portion and a laboratory portion. We'll see the lab first, and then we're going to put the crushing facility in on the other end. It's interesting, we talk about the decline of population. Our lab actually came from a high school that closed down in the area. We put this lab together we combined 3 high schools to get 80 kids in one here about a year ago up there. And this lab, no other schools wanted it, and so we went to the school board, and they agreed to sell it to us. So we moved it from the high school into our building, and we had some equipment with it. The USDA has helped us with some other equipment, and that kind of got us started on the research side of things. This is a storage tank, probably finished fuel we'll use it for. This is the plant itself, the reactor's in the back, the blue accumulators in the front, another picture of it. The two side white containers are cone bottom vessels, and that's this whole plant. Biodiesel doesn't take a lot of room. It's a batch process. You mix 3 chemicals together. You mix the vegetable oil, a catalyst, in our case we're using sodium hydroxide, and an alcohol, and in our case we're using methanol. All 3 of those things I can go to the grocery store right down the street and buy. I can buy canola oil off the shelf. I can buy Red Devil Lye off the shelf, which is sodium hydroxide. In the heat, the little yellow balls of heat we put in our gas tanks, when our fuel gels up, that's methanol. You mix those 3 things together under the right conditions, and you create biodiesel. And what we've put up here in the front is we've created biodiesel out of 5 or 6 different oils. We've created it out of a mustard oil, is a green one. We've created it out of a camelina oil, which is a new crop we're trying to grow up in our area of the country. We've made it out of a luscarella, which is a new plant they're growing down in Arizona. It has some very specific properties. And we've made it out of canola. And we've made it out of waste vegetable oil, canola that has been through a fryer. And the second one to the end, you'll see the dark layer on the bottom. When we make biodiesel, we get biodiesel on the top, and you'll see some SEP funnels in there. That SEP funnel right there, the top of that is biodiesel, the bottom of it's glycerin. After you mix all those chemicals up at a certain temperature for a certain period of time, basically you break the glycerin off, and you get the biodiesel. The glycerin floats to the bottom, we separate that off, and the biodiesel, we clean it up, we dry it, and then it's a sellable product. And so that's kind of the process that we do up there. Like I said, it doesn't take a lot of equipment, and it doesn't take, biodiesel is not hard to make, but ASTM 6751 certified biodiesel is a little more difficult to make because we have to meet about 13 standards in that test, and that's what Jessica was talking about at Northern that they're going to test to meet that standard. We don't have to do that as a company. We've made a commitment to do that, but we don't have to. We could make this biodiesel, sell it on the street. The incentive to do that is a federal tax credit that by passing 6751, we'll get that tax credit, or the blender will get that tax credit. So the federal governments have put an incentive out there to make a quality type fuel. One of the challenges is biodiesel, we hear it all the time, has not very good cold flow properties. ASTM 6751 does not address cold flow properties.
Let's save that cold flow question for a bit later.
Okay.
I hear you saying that this is as simple as kitchen science creating it, but then I heard you use the word reactor, which sounds a little more complicated too. So
well,
how simple is it?
Basically what we do is that reactor is just a jacketed vessel with a big stirrer in it. We put the vegetable oil in there, we put the catalyst, and we put the alcohol in there, we heat it to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and we stir it for an hour. And that's basically the reaction. It's pushing that reaction to completion and those type of things that's a little more of a challenge. That glycerin, folks out there burn straight vegetable oil, and diesel engines were designed to run straight vegetable oil. The original diesel engines were designed to run peanut oil. The challenge is that glycerin on the bottom has a propensity to gum up engines. And so biodiesel, we take that glycerin off, and we basically deal with that fatty acid methyl ester. In our case, it's methyl because we use methanol. But that's the reason we want to take that glycerin out. The other reason is it flows a lot easier. It's a thinner product, and so it'll flow through the fuel system a lot easier. We don't have to put heaters on the fuel system to get it to flow through the fuel pump and into the combustion chamber. It's easy science. It's not very complex science. Nothing like an ethanol plant. When we first started this, we started talking about an ethanol plant, and ethanol has distillation in it. It has fermentation. All those processes are a little more difficult than just a batch reactor, and gravity does a lot of our work. Gravity settles out that glycerin, and so it does a majority of our work for us, other than the stirring and the heating.
So Jessica, 2 questions for you. The first, we're hearing a reference to a standard that needs to be met if you'd like to capture this tax credit. First, Logan, what is that tax credit?
That is a federal tax credit, and it is it's actually a 99-cent tax credit. You get a penny per percent in a gallon.
Per percent of biodiesel.
Per percent of biodiesel in a gallon for the blender. So whoever does the blending in the fuel gets to capture the credit.
And is the credit going to sunset, or is that forever?
No, it will sunset eventually. It's in the, I believe it's in the Farm Bill right now, isn't it? Or the Energy Bill, Energy Policy Act.
Okay.
And whenever that act is rewritten, they will either decide to extend it or drop it. So.
And if you want to capture the tax credit, then your biodiesel needs to be certified through a facility like at MSU Northern?
Right, well, pretty much what the benefit is to Earl Fisher is that they'll have a better, well, one, that they can say that their product is absolutely perfect. It's not gonna hurt your engine. It's not gonna gel up because it has too much water in it. It's not gonna wreck things like that. But it also gives them the market as far as blenders, and gives the blenders a little bit of encouragement to use biodiesel, because there's not too many in Montana. There's not too many blenders that are willing to do that, because it does take a little bit extra things to.
Is the blender a device or a person?
It's an entity.
It's an entity.
Okay.
We would sell our biodiesel as a B100, and the blender, let's say the local distributor blends it down to a B20, and we talk about B20, it's 20% biodiesel, they get to capture that tax credit.
The blender captures the tax
The
credit.
blender, and so when we talk about blender, that's what we're talking about, an entity that's going to buy the biodiesel and blend that with petroleum diesel.
And we talked previously on the phone about how, what the range is of B2 to B100. Tell us more about the advantages of a more diluted.
Well, when you say B100, it's 100% biodiesel. What you see here sold in Missoula and around about, you hear a lot about B20. And you have a lot of car manufacturers and truck manufacturers that are now certifying their engines to run on B20, meaning they'll recognize their warranties if you're using B20. B just means biodiesel. The number behind it usually is the percentage of biodiesel in that blend. Some countries, like the Philippines, have now mandated that all their diesel has at least 1% diesel. So I guess it'd be B100. Over in the European Union, a lot of those countries, to meet the ultra low sulfur requirements for diesel for clean air quality standards, when you take out the sulfur in diesel, you lose the lubricity, so it's a little bit harsher on your engines, and you need to replace that with something. What they chose to do over there, rather than use an additive, they chose to use biodiesel. So you have, like, Czechoslovakia has been running B20 for years. The European Union is way ahead of us. A lot of countries are way ahead of us in the terms of biodiesel than what the United States is. We didn't get interested in biodiesel until diesel started hitting $3 a gallon.
Is biodiesel competitive price-wise with diesel?
If you took out all the subsidies that's out there for the petroleum industry, absolutely. In fact, it's probably even cheaper. If you add in the reduction in the emissions and even the smell, who wants to be sitting behind a big old nasty truck for too long in traffic? It's definitely cheaper. Probably right now as it is, it's pretty competitive. I don't know how much it's costing you guys to produce.
One thing that we have to do in farm country, and that's mainly where we're going to market our product. We believe in a system where we grow it locally, manufacture it locally, consume it locally. So what we have to do in farm country is we have to compete with petroleum. We have to compete with the price of dyed fuel. Mm-hmm. And if we can't do that on the farm, then nobody will buy our product, because the farm is cost sensitive. As we talked earlier about the shrinking margins and how tight things are, the farmer has to go with the cheapest inputs that they can, because in the environment right now we can talk about record gross profit, but when you talk about record gross, you don't talk about record input costs that we're paying also. So that the net profit probably has not increased a whole lot on the farm, and the family farm, whoever it is going to watch that cost. So we have to compete, and we know that. Yes, we can send it away. We can take it to other places where there is more profit margin, but we feel we need to do it in our area for our smaller communities, and we need to fill those markets first, and then move the excess out.
That self-sufficiency is really appealing, I think, to a lot of people. Did you consider keeping the product on the farm for the farm, or how did you decide to distribute it?
That was the very first, when we started this project, that was the very first thing we were just going to do on the farm. We're going to do a small plant on the farm, basically take care of the farm's needs. And the numbers we throw out are an oil seed that produces a 35% oil content, which are canola, camelina, safflower are right in that area. They produce 1,250 pounds per acre, and that's about an average production. So we have a 35% oil seed at 1,250 pounds per acre. We get an 85% crush, meaning we get 85% oil out of that seed. 100 acres will produce 5,000 gallons of fuel and 45 tons of feed. And the discussion earlier on the impact of ethanol on feeding, feed's produced. In the ethanol process, in the biodiesel process, feed's produced. We're actually probably a feed producer. 65% of the pounds that go through our plant are high protein meal. 35% of it's oil. And so that's a market that we have to participate in. There's a feed market there. So the feed value, or the hogs, the cattle, the chicken, there's advantages to having a feed source that close. Because right now, folks in our area of the country bring soy meal in, and we will hopefully fill that need for them.
So for those of us who are not as familiar with agriculture, beyond eating the food that we get from it, when we were talking about a feed, am I hearing you say properly that you're taking advantage of what would otherwise be a waste product in the system?
And we don't use the word waste because it's 65% of the total pounds that go through our plant. So we have to find value for that. And food is, for animals, is one of the values. And so we're trying to develop some markets for that meal also.
We have some camelina seed down here, and then we have the camelina meal, which is the camelina after the oil's been extracted, crushed out, and then we've got the camelina diesel and stuff like that.
And Logan, I remember you had said to me, biodiesel is not biodiesel is not biodiesel. Why was camelina a big breakthrough?
Well, camelina is a big breakthrough from an economic standpoint on the farm. It doesn't take a whole lot of inputs to raise camelina. It likes marginal soil. It likes our desert type area that we live in northern Montana. It grows very efficiently. It's good for the farm because they can grow a crop that they don't have to put any inputs into, and then we can afford to pay, well, then we don't have to afford to pay so much for it also, and we can keep the cost of our fuel down. And then when you get more into the biodiesel isn't biodiesel, each oil that we use has a different profile, and the chemist here can tell everybody more about that. But soy biodiesel is actually one of the more poor as far as cold flow properties. Biodiesel is all a lot very the same as far as its lubricity characteristics, using it for lubricity. But when you talk about using biodiesel in Montana, Colorado, Idaho, cold weather areas, North Dakota, you want something that is going to have a nice cold flow. And
yeah, let's talk about cold flow. We're all from places with harsh winters, as hard as it is to imagine today. Can you explain what cloud point is, what the gelling, what's the problem with that?
I'll let Brett cover that.
The cloud point, basically it's a test to see, and the Luscarella is one of it. It has a slight cloud to it. It's not a clear fuel, and that cloud is, in the petroleum side of things, is a wax crystals forming. In our side of things, it's molecules coming together, and they plug up fuel filters, and it's all temperature dependent. Those samples right there, when we did our cold flow test, the camelina was about a -4 Celsius, the mustard was about a -4 Celsius, the canola was about a -15 Celsius, and the waste vegetable oil was about a -15 Celsius. That's when we started seeing a little bit of cloud. Now, if you drop that temperature down even further, it will get to where it doesn't even move, it doesn't even pour. And basically, when we test that, we put it in a little jar, drop it to temperatures, and we tip that jar to the side and count to 10 seconds, and if the top of that liquid does not move, then we've reached our pour point. It's not a lot of science to it, and that's an ASTM test. But what it does is it tells us when that fluid will stop flowing. And petroleum diesel's number 2 diesel cloud point is in the -25 Celsius range. And so that's kind of numbers that we're trying to get to. And as we blend, when we put a B20 together, that affects the petroleum diesel the cloud point will get a little higher, and the biodiesel, the mixture will come down. And so in cold weather, we try to shoot for that -20, -25 Celsius, and then we can keep those fuel tanks from gelling up.
And because of the chemical makeup of a canola oil versus a soy oil, that has different cold flow properties. A soy would gel at what, 20 degrees?
I don't know that number exactly. We can't grow a lot of soybean in our area, and so we probably won't be dealing with that fuel as much as we'll deal with the other fuels.
Jessica, part of MSU Northern's work is the Business Incubation Lab. Can you talk about two of the projects or several of the projects that have come out of that?
Well, like I mentioned, we're all brand new. We're actually funded by Wired grant right now, which is a workforce innovation grant through the Department of Labor. Governor Schweitzer went ahead and applied for a grant, got a grant, $15 million grant for the next 3 years to be able to grow and support this, what he calls an agro industry business plan. And so we have, part of that is developed our incubation center, and what we provide some business plan development assistance, marketing assistance, and of course affordable office space to help grow these industries. We just opened our doors in September of 2006, so we have had 2 businesses in there right now, and one of them, they're kind of one and the same business, but they're looking at the feasibility of developing a big biodiesel plant in Havre, Montana, along the ranges of 10 million gallons a year plant. That's still in the development stages. We'll see how the feasibility all comes out and whether that would happen. But if that does happen, what that means for Havre, Montana is another big industry to kind of support some of these jobs that are dissipating. It means anywhere from 50 to 100 jobs, a big construction, some construction money and construction jobs while it's under development, and of course some railroad jobs as the fuel, because in that type of case, most likely the fuel will have to be shipped in, or the feedstock have to be shipped in and by railroad is how that would happen.
Can you talk about the e-box?
E-box is a technology that's being developed out of, I think they're based out of Great Falls, Montana, or a little bit south of Great Falls. And it's a flywheel technology. It's, I don't know all the technology particulars of it, but it's an apparatus that goes on a diesel engine that will increase the fuel efficiency, they claim, by as much as 10%, as well as decrease the emissions. It's one of our first tests. We're looking at doing the test next week, actually. We're going to start some of the product testing. And to measure, we have a fuel consumption machine. It's a pretty basic test. We have a couple test engines. We'll run it without the apparatus, see where our baseline is. We'll put the apparatus on, measure the fuel consumption, and see where it comes out as well as monitoring the emissions from it. So, if it happens, if it all proves out, then we'll probably be working with them on marketing and even production of this particular technology here in Montana.
Thinking about soil health, I could hear a critic saying, well, look, many people, or rather really more corporations in the country, don't care about the soil in the race to increase a crop yield via fertilizer and not rotating the crops. If we don't even care about our soil for the food that we're raising, we'd probably care far less about the fuel. How would you respond to a critic?
I'd say being a farmer, farmers don't knowingly go out and put something on their fields that they would believe was going to hurt them. In the farm environment and where we're at, a lot of the technology has been developed by Monsanto's and large companies of this nature, and they have the products, and the products work, so the farmers believe that they should use them. That is really the source of information on the farm, and to increase yields and different things like that in the global market, the farmer goes to use them. So I think some of we have to be diligent not to use something that would hurt the land, but again, I believe some of those bigger companies should be maybe watched a little more, or maybe have their directions changed into things that would be better for the land, because they're the major suppliers. They're the only ones we can go to. There are new technologies out there for sequestration of carbon and different things that I think that the farm can participate in that are going to be very good for environmental purposes, very good for a production aspect that gets us away from the chemicals, gets us away from the conventional fertilizers. And in our area, we mainly grow wheat, but we have seen a great benefit to rotating an oil seed through the farm, rotating a pea crop through the farm. And there's great economic benefits and agricultural benefits to doing that. And hopefully rotating the oil seeds and different things through will help. And it always helps to have a green growing crop versus a fallow situation, which we have to do in our area just because of rainfall issues. But if we can find crops that finish ahead like camelina does, it leaves more moisture for the next growing season. We can rotate those through and hopefully provide that.
Is ADM or ConAgra, are they on the oil seed crop? Is that competition?
They're competition because they're building a huge biodiesel plant in North Dakota. And so they're definitely getting into the game.
50 million gallon.
Yeah, huge. I don't know that they participate because for camelina, for instance, there's no sprays labeled for it yet. And so those companies have not participated in research on what sprays you can use to kill some other of the grasses or to clean up the ground, those type of things. So I don't think that they have yet jumped on. If one of the slides that we talk about a lot is if we took all the lard and all the vegetable oil produced in the United States and made biodiesel out of it, that would only be about 13% of the over-the-road diesel consumed in the United States.
Wow.
And so we don't make a very big dent in the whole scheme of things. But as the ADMs of the world, the Paul Allen's plant that's going in out in Grace Harbor, as those start coming online, then we will probably make a bigger dent.
It seems like there's a wide berth in the market at this point. Let's talk about questions. Anybody have questions from the audience?
My name is Michelle Reinhardt, and I'm a state representative from Missoula. And a lot of our Missoula delegation is supportive of biodiesel. Representative Holly Razor carried a tax credit for producers. My first question is, has that been helpful to you? What could make it more helpful? Or if you're not using it, why not?
The tax credit for producers?
Right.
The tax credit for producers will be helpful. We haven't made a whole lot of biodiesel yet as far as mainstream production. Any tax credit's going to be helpful. And there was actually some different versions of that bill, I think, that might have made a little more impact, but when the session failed, the governor had to veto everything that passed, and we kind of lost a lot there. But yes, it depends on where you place the incentives for who gets in. If you place the incentives as a tax credit for the producer, there's going to be biodiesel producers get in. If you place a tax credit somewhere more for the farm, then there's going to be more of a supply for oilseed. It's all going to kind of commingle, and we understand helping out the farm because we're farmers, but most of the companies that are going to get into this business are going to try to capture as much profit as they can. And the farm might get left out again as far as what they're going to get paid or how much revenue is going to be returned into that oil seed or back to the farm. I hope that answered part of your question.
If you could just leave it at
Sure.
one question, but please come
Okay.
back.
All right. I'll wait. Go ahead.
I would just like to ask a question. I drive a diesel Excursion, so this is near and dear to my heart. It's
Okay.
a 7,000-pound vehicle. The diesel version, though, this is what's neat about it. The gas version gets about 8 to 10 miles a gallon. I get 20 miles a gallon in my diesel Excursion. It has a 42-gallon tank.
That
When I
hurts.
go to fill up, so,
$100.
so yeah, it is. Last summer, I'm very interested in making the switch to biodiesel. Last summer, when there was a plant down in a station down in Billings that started selling it, the price difference per gallon is 50 cents a gallon. So you run that out for a fill up, 42 gallons, you're looking at about $20 more per fill up. That makes it really hard as a consumer. So I guess when you guys said that it was price competitive, can you speak to how soon are we going to see something where it's affordable for an ordinary person? And then the second thing is, how much does the biodiesel, does it degrade the fuel economy of standard? Because even if it's the same price, if my mileage drops to like 15 miles a gallon.
Yep.
You can speak to both
To your
those.
first question, you're not going to see price competitivity. I don't think in the larger areas of the state and different places where people have more disposable income and people that want to buy biodiesel are going to buy biodiesel, and that they'll keep the price up there as long as they can. That's just the market. Until there's enough biodiesel out there to get 20% biodiesel everywhere, I don't think you're going to see that. We have to, in our area, just again, to get rid of our product, unless there's somebody who wants to pay all the shipping to get it from here to, or from Chester to wherever. But that's going to cost too. And then the fuel efficiency side of it, biodiesel, well, there's an increase in horsepower, and there is a small drop in efficiency because the molecule is larger, and when the fuel pump pushes it in, it pushes more fuel through. But that's like a 12% increase in power. Now this is all tests that have been done on dynos, so engines have been running at peak horsepower and peak performance and stuff like that. So 12% increase in power, 8% decrease in fuel economy. Now whether you'll see that going over the road, I don't know. I've heard of studies that came out of big trucking companies that the fuel economy didn't change. It actually got a little better because of the lubricity and the engine wear was less. So I don't know if there's been a whole lot of tests done yet to know.
Thanks.
The trucking industry has some real concerns about the gelling characteristics of it, particularly through Minnesota and that area. Have you folks done any testing on the various additives such as House or Power Service to add to it to prevent the gelling?
What I've done is rather than do Power Service, I've went one step back in the production chain and found the additive suppliers, and I've found an additive for these that I can freeze that oil at about a minus 35 Celsius clear. So it will freeze before it will cloud. And whether that additive is economical or not, we're trying to discuss that. We've also, in the lab, developed a molecule that will drop at about 7 to 10 degrees. So I can bring that canola fatty acid down to minus 22 to minus 25, which is the same as number 2. If you read Power Service on the back of their containers, they give you a higher dose rate for B20 than they do for regular petroleum. So they must, to put that on the back of their product, they must have tested that. But there are additives out there, and the nice thing about it is when we blend ours, when we send a batch of biodiesel out, we'll be able to tell the customer, we'll give it the profile. The B5, B10, B20, B50, B75, this is your gel points. So if it's February, we're probably not going to sell a lot of soy biodiesel to north central Montana. It's just going to create problems for the whole industry.
Hello, I'm Barbara Bramble with the National Wildlife Federation, and I'm going to be moderating the ethanol discussion tomorrow afternoon. And in case people haven't picked up this is a handout that I brought that's talking about an international discussion of how to have environmental standards also added to the biofuels discussion. We won't have much time to talk about that, so that's why I brought it. It's really great to hear about your local production and your interest in having it for local use. And if you haven't joined already the Sustainable Biodiesel Alliance, I recommend that you find them and do join them, because you're up against something that you talked about, with the big guys getting in as soon as there's a thought that there might be some profit in all of this. And particularly, you did mention the Grays Harbor import. There's going to be a whole lot of big companies bringing in a competitive product based on palm oil grown in Southeast Asia, which is way cheaper than anything you all can produce here. And the big problem that the rest of us need to worry about is that to make that palm oil available for biodiesel, it means they have to strip out a whole lot more tropical rainforest in Southeast Asia, emitting way more greenhouse gases than anybody could possibly save in 50 years in use of biodiesel. So think local, as everybody is always trying to say. It has a real global impact. I guess my question is, how do you hope to prepare for this international competition from products that are likely to be based on real resource destruction, and hopefully yours isn't?
On the Paul Allen's plant out there, I was able to get a hold of his business plan, or the partial business plan, and they're actually bringing that palm kernel oil in on barges for $2.70 a gallon. And the standard formula that we use is 80%, if you're a state-of-the-art plant, 80% of your cost of production is the oil going in the front end. So 80% of his cost of production is $2.70. 20% is the rest of it. That puts his fuel at $3.43, roughly, $3.34, just right out of his plant. We can compete with that. We can compete with $3.30 fuel. He's sending most of his plant's sending most down to California,
right.
So he's not going to get into our market as much. But if he has to buy that for $2.70 to get it in there, we can produce it on the farm for less than that.
Great. Well, hopefully transportation costs will work in your favor. Thank you.
And yeah, the Burlington Northern takes $1.20 from every bushel of wheat we send out of the Golden Triangle up there. And when wheat's $3, $4 a bushel, that's quite a percentage. We're going to take that $1.20, we're going to put it back in the community. We're going to put it into equipment, into the plant, into those type of things, and not give it to Burlington Northern. We had a gent from the grain growers talk about delivery points. We're going to create a delivery point for the farmer, and then we're going to be able to fight some of the basis pricing that we see at the elevators. And it's those type of things that are very exciting for us up in that area.
One more comment on the palm kernel oil. They don't want to send palm kernel oil to Montana in the winter because that again is one of the lower quality oils. So I mean, it's as much and as cheap as they can get it. Where we have to sell our quality. That's another place we have to compete. We have to sell the quality.
I realize we've got quite a few questions left, and I'm sorry because we're out of time. But if you would sincerely follow up after you'll be around today.
Absolutely.
So if we can follow up then. Thanks to our panel. At this point, we're going to cut to the film Nobody's Home, which is Sopris's film. It's premiering right here, right now. It's a 13-minute film. It's short. If you'd like to stick around and discuss afterwards, that'd be fun too.
Someone knocking at the door, somebody ringing the bell. Someone's knocking at the door, somebody's ringing the bell. Do me a favor, open the door and let him in. Ooh, yeah.
Yogi Berra once said, "It's very difficult to predict things, especially the future."
The best thing Aspen can offer the world is a lesson for other communities.
It never occurred to me that somebody would want a 20,000 square foot house or a 50,000. It's just inconceivable in those days.
Aspen has paid a certain price for its vanity.
Other communities have got to realize this may happen to them in the West as well.
we see the writing on the wall. We realize that the floodgate is pushed with water and that at any moment it could break.
I think the question we're all grappling with is, can we still make the dream of living in a small town in a beautiful place in the mountains a reality?
Someone's knocking at the door, somebody ringing the bell. Someone knocking at the door, somebody ringing the bell. Do me a favor, open the door and let 'em in. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Lori and I came to Aspen in 1966. We built a life and raised our 3 kids here. It didn't seem like anybody had any really more important goals than just being there and being part of the community. That was the goal, and we'd all sort of achieved it. Of course, we all had to make a living. We had to do something, and there was opportunities here and there for all of us. But the real essence and spirit of the place was that you were there. You were part of this incredible scene.
What young associates do in law firms is take the dirty work from the partners. And I was first sent up here by one of the senior partners to break up a romance between the daughter of a well-regarded family and a ranch hand. The Aspen that I saw, the streets were not paved. Irrigation water ran down the ditches to irrigate the cottonwood trees. It was a really small, intact community. I was very taken with it.
My first job when I came to Aspen was painting wax on the bottoms of skis and inhaling pots of smoldering wax. The one thing that I really enjoyed was that Aspen became a place where different classes of people mixed freely. The old-timer that might be making very little money was a great skier, and the newcomer who might have been making a lot of money was a neophyte, and so there were real reasons for them to each want to get to know each other.
I came to Aspen on August 27th, 1982. It happened to be my mom's birthday. I remember coming over Independence Pass and thinking, okay, this is pretty, and we turned left into town and drove towards the ski area and said, okay, that looks steep enough, that'll do. And we were washing dishes by the end of the week. When the hippies found it in the late 60s, early 70s, it was a magical little spot full of interesting people. One of my friends has a great saying that Aspen's full of the black sheep of the best families in America. There are interesting people in Aspen, colorful people.
This was just at the end of the Kennedy era, where it was what could you do for your country. I became involved in the rising concern within the community as to whether the growth rate was not too fast. The migration of people out of the community had just begun. We got a map out of the voting precincts in Aspen. We divided each one in half and began to schedule a series of coffees with each neighborhood. The uniform refrain at the caucus meetings is almost the same as it is today, and that is, we like it the way it is. We began a 4-year process of rezoning the whole valley floor in one fell swoop. The courthouse was full to the brim of people. We had death threats. We had to put TVs in the downstairs of the courthouse. The place was so full. People could rail and scream and have anxiety attacks about it, but the bottom line was the votes were there and the community was with us.
The people who tried to preserve it and protect it in the first place never could possibly envision the great economic wave and pressure that was coming our way. Homes that were occupied by families that lived and worked in the community have become corporate retreats.
Nobody really understood 20 years ago the relationship between job generation, baby boom retirement, tax changes, and affluence around the world.
We're on Hallam Street between 2nd and 3rd and Aspen's West End. We're in front of Gretel Uhl's former property. Gretel Uhl was a very special woman, very warm-hearted, loving, fun person. She was my landlady for 4 years. I knew of her before she was my landlady, but I got to know her really, really well. This little octagon here, half an octagon, was sacred ground just because it was Gretel's kitchen. It was Gretel's world, and you could not come over and spend time in Gretel's kitchen without leaving charmed and walking out of her house and going, God, I'm so glad I live in Aspen, Colorado. This is such a neat community. When I went by the other day and saw the house being renovated and worked on, that was kind of hard. Gretel's house is changing, and it seems indicative of what's happening to Aspen in many ways. I don't think there's anybody on the block anymore who's here year-round. I now call Aspen's West End one of the world's best architectural preserves. It's a showcase for architecture, and it's busy and full of people on the 4th of July and Christmas, and very quiet the rest of the year.
I look at Aspen as a place that was so in love with its image. It has kind of become more subservient to what it looks like than actually what it is like. It's an innocent bargain with the devil. A lot of people really wanted to stay here, and they wanted to figure out how to stay here. And the prices obviously kept escalating. And the idea of buying a house in the West End for $45,000, which is what it cost more or less when I moved here, those opportunities were gone.
Houses that were built for $10 a foot today sell for $2,000 to $3,000 a foot.
When we first moved from Aspen down Valley, I knew all my neighbors. I was like, oh, this is where everybody went.
The majority of the employees for Aspen and within Pitkin County live what we call down Valley. They live in communities that are 15 miles down the road, 20 miles down the road, 40 miles down the road, 100, 120 miles down the road that service our community on a daily basis.
When I moved down Valley, it was a conscious move to a place that I thought embodied a lot of the physical characteristics that Aspen had, and moved to Basalt and got a place that I could afford at that time.
People ask me, where do you live? And I say, well, I sleep in Basalt, but I live in Aspen.
Until recently, Basalt was still, compared to Aspen, a huge bargain. We had prices for an average single-family home in Basalt were, maybe a tenth of what the home would be in Aspen. But in the last 2 years, things have just gone through the roof. So the day when you could say, well, that's okay, the teachers will live in Basalt and commute up here on the bus, those days are going away because those places are attractive, beautiful communities with their own little sense of small town character in themselves, and they're suffering from just what Aspen did. Their success is the seeds of their own demise.
I'm a pilot and I fly all around the West. I know lots of little towns from Montana through New Mexico and Arizona and Idaho. Wonderful mountain communities that are just as beautiful as Aspen, Colorado. I think the same thing, the same great economic juggernaut could come their way. People have 3 and 4 homes around the world. Players in that world have net worths 10 to 1,000 times greater than the people living in those towns. And so, of course, they can just buy it up. I think the key thing is to zone not just for appearance. Nobody's done a better job of that than Aspen. Aspen's more beautiful than it ever was. New communities have been built for working people on the outskirts. Complicated transportation systems have been introduced. New deed restrictions and buy-downs and complicated formulas for ADUs and RO and Category 3 and 4 housing, etc., etc. Very draconian measures to try to preserve and protect what we once had. Far simpler, ahead of the game, would be to define what is residential for your town. Is residential an area where people actually live?
Communities in every western state have significant authority to manage growth in a manner that protects what they value, that protects their community character. There's a range of tools that allow them to do that. The key to maintaining a community where school teachers and firefighters can continue to live there and where you have a vital year-round community is to start early.
Don't indulge in rescue fantasies. And that's very tempting. If I just let things go, the market will fix it. Your responsibility is to look to the future. What do you want to be in your community 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now? We as a council have been faced with the challenge of how do we address these problems?
We struggle with the fact that we need to do something, that we can't just sit back and let the free market do whatever it wants, because we will end up with a hollow communities.
Do you still want a town for your children and grandchildren? And if you do, think beyond just appearances. Think about measures to protect the fabric and character of your community.
Go ahead and do it. What's it going to hurt? You're going to make some people angry? Well, go ahead. At least you'll have a town in 30 years.
John, do you want to say a few words?
Well, it's hard, you know. I can just say in the early days when I moved to Aspen, we had some of the brightest and best people writing the land use regulations, and they were extremely thorough in every detail you can think of. But no one ever thought that a private residence would be anything other than a home. So I don't know if it's ever been done, but I think you want to think about in your town, if you possibly have this pressure coming, of really defining what a residence is. Because in Aspen, it can be almost anything. People can take their home and they can timeshare it, they can
sell it to somebody who uses it as a private hotel, or like I mentioned, a corporate retreat. These are things that are not homes, and that sort of pressure and experience in a town does a lot to destroy your town. I don't know, but it seems to me in Aspen they define commercial uses with great detail, and it takes forever to change something from, say, a particular shop to a bank or a restaurant. And it's all about, supposedly, about impacts. But nothing is a greater impact on a community, to me, than if what was once lived-in residence for a permanent person who worked in the town suddenly becomes a former private hotel. That's a huge impact, and yet it never was addressed in the zoning rules and regulations we had.
And I just wanted to add that on one hand, I suppose it's probably difficult to sympathize with the plight of the poor Aspenite. You know, woe is us, loss of community. But I think that if we're passionate about anything, it is creating and preserving a sense of place, and it becomes quite tangible. And I think a magnified impact when you wonder with whom your children will have a play group, or if you'll even have close friends to have over for a potluck. And when everyone has to drive to not only go to work, but to go to church and to go meet up with friends for dinner and whatnot, it becomes a much more serious problem. And our position is just to say, this is a concern for us, and please don't exempt yourselves from believing it's a concern for you too, because our sense is that it's coming. I don't know if anyone has a question or a comment, but we'd love to engage in dialogue ongoing about this.
Is it on? Yeah. I'm just trying to reconcile what Jim Kunstler said earlier this afternoon with this film, and in fact what has been said in a number of presentations. Because if you accept that some version of what his view of the future, I'm not sure I do, but it's for the sake of argument, if you accept that, what does this imply in terms of the pressures on places like Aspen? If the economy is going to seriously go into problems, what does this mean in terms of how one, if let's say Aspen or a city or a town that is not that far along, what does it do? Does it approach it as you are suggesting, or is it a very different strategy and scenario as a result of that?
Well, we really made this film, nothing's going to change in Aspen. Aspen's what it is. And the purpose of this film is just to indicate to people what might come their way. Aspen, after all, is an economic wonder and a social catastrophe, if I may say so. And now we're doing all kinds of things to try to do catch-up to preserve remnants of the community, but that's hard work and takes, you know, a huge planning office and all kinds of ordinances and what have you to create new communities and everything else. As far as what Jim Kunstler's talking about, what's happening in Aspen is going in 180 degrees the opposite direction of what he's talking about. Ultimately, these towns have got to be brought together and coalesce in the center and go back to the countryside. We had an idyllic James Kunstler town in the 60s and early 70s.
Something that we're seeing here, it's not that we're losing the town, but we're definitely losing neighborhoods and districts. There are neighborhoods in Missoula, neighborhoods in Boise, neighborhoods in Portland that don't have kids anymore because the prices of the houses are so expensive that there are no children. They're all, you know, everybody who can afford to live there has either been there so long that their children have grown up, or they're so advanced in their career that they're moving in as empty nesters and the like. So we see, and you know, I wouldn't be concerned that it's Aspen and Aspen is unique. I mean, if you look at the Roaring Fork Valley as a community, and Aspen is a neighborhood in that community, it's just like we have here. People are working here and living in Hamilton, or living, you know, down in Ravalli County because that's where they can afford to live. And the center of our community is becoming a place that in 20 or 30 years could be very like what you've got. So, good job.
Yeah, that's so true. I think the community that Katie Selby is talking about in Buena Vista, that's a wonderful example of how you can preserve some community spaces. We did a project I mentioned to you before where, I don't know if Cindy Hubin's still here, but it's called it's RO, Resident Occupied, and to live in that community, and people built their own homes there, you have to be an employed resident. You have to prove that. When you get ready to sell, you have to sell to somebody just like yourself, approved by the housing office, and there's an escalator. It can't go up more than 3 or 4% per year, the cost of the lot and the house. And it's worked extremely well. It's very popular. It's full of kids. And as far as I can see, it looks like it's going to stay that way forever, unless the only people left voting in Aspen are the residents of that community, and they decide they want part of the greater pie. And they vote all the controls off themselves.
So, are there any examples of places that you would consider to be communities that are mountain communities that have succeeded? I mean, because what we're doing here is we're talking about Aspen and how it hasn't succeeded and how it hasn't done any of these things. But surely, somewhere in the world, there's a community, a mountain community that has succeeded in some very popular ways and is creating a sense of community year-round. One of those communities I would suggest might well be Whistler. Are there any other examples?
You know, the two that we're aware of, and I'd like to look into Whistler more, the two that we're aware of who's done it best is Banff, but they're a special exception. So Banff has a need to reside ordinance, and you can only remain in the town if you are a full-time employee or a recent retiree and are earning your primary income, not an internet-based income, but your primary income in town. However, it's on a land lease because it's a national park, so that's tough to replicate.
Banff is a unique community. I come from there, so.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Banff is a unique community because it is within a national park. Waterton community is the same. There are a number of mountain communities in Canada that are part of national parks. Canmore would be a stunning bad example, such as Aspen. I used to live in Canmore, and it's disgusting. Calgary's right next door. I grew up in Calgary. I mean, my parents came there when it was 66,000 people, and now it's 1 million. And I'm not that old. But there have to be good examples. Like I've been in Whistler, I've been in some of the European communities and their mountain communities, and they seem to be doing a really stunning job.
Do you want to talk about Europe?
Yeah, I agree with you. The best that I've ever seen is in Europe, and there's a whole different attitude. I mean, they're more concerned with quality of life than frontier freedom. And that's the big difference between Europe and the United States, I think. I've seen lots of little wonderful communities in the West, but they really haven't been discovered yet, and they're still operating on a free economy program. The ones I've seen in Europe, though, are truly special, and I'll tell you, it was too long ago. I was in Klosters, and I was wandering around after skiing, and I noticed there was something very different about this town from Aspen, which is, well, it's more like Snowmass Resort. That I didn't see any real estate offices, any real estate signs. And I know that businesses and homes sell there from time to time. So I asked the little lady who was staying in a little hotel called Chez Krishina. I said, how is this? I know that properties sell around here from time to time and businesses change hands. You have no realtors here, no real estate signs. She said, of course we don't have those. We don't need them. I said, why is that? She said, whenever we get ready to sell a home or a place of business, we always offer it first to family members and then to friends. It never goes further than that. Isn't that a wonderful attitude? I mean, this passion for your town and your place. And, you know, maybe the lesson of Aspen is somehow cultivate that, because that is so special. If you feel, there are a lot of us that feel strongly about the Aspen Valley, but it's slipped away slowly under our noses. It wasn't a crisis like 9/11. It was just little by little. It was always going out the door, and then you wake up one day and it's dead. So I don't know how you cultivate that. I think the most important things I mentioned, if there's a way to do it, really define what you mean by residential, because residential drives commercial. The minute we go second home with fancy homes, then we get all the art galleries and jewelry shops. If we have people living there, we have good basic businesses, and and so I think residential is the key if you can define it.
I have a question. It seems like Aspen's success, which became, from your perspective, sort of a tragedy of sorts, was largely due to it being a wonderful destination, and that there's this free market dynamic that in states like Montana, I think people are reticent to restrict the forces of the free market in many cases. And I wonder if there is anything that you can point to in the zoning code that was created in the 60s or 70s in Aspen that actually created an incentive for what Aspen has become. Was there something flawed about that initial vision?
Well, I don't know if it was in the zoning code, but we all did too good a job with Aspen. I mean, we all thought when we were young we should be on this park board and that wildlife board and make it more and more beautiful and fix it up, and we were worrying about dormers and the heights of buildings and parking spaces, and we were just looking at the wrong things. And meanwhile, while we were making it more beautiful, it was slipping away from us. What is really the bottom line problem isn't the outside buyers that come in. They may have been spending their whole life in an office in New York, and some portfolio manager says, well, you really ought to diversify and have a place in Aspen or Jackson Hole. And so they say, oh, I should, and they go out there. They really don't seem to know what they want, so they end up in the hands of a realtor and an architect and a builder. All of them are on a commission. All of them are incentivizing them to build a big, stupid house, in my opinion. So in a way, the system fights against the very things the community wants. But I don't think there's anything particular in our zoning. I just think we just didn't go far enough.
Could I just add, I think that tax policy has a lot to do with it too, because or there are certainly remedies for this problem in tax policy. Yes. Primarily, the speculation in our area is absurd. It's embarrassing to admit that houses will turn around, 2 contracts will be on the desk. The second house will sell before the first has even closed at a $300,000 gain for the first buyer. So when you have a time frame that's driving appreciation that fast, I think that's one way to slow it, is to have an anti-flip tax, similar to how Vermont has negotiated this. Also, real estate transfer taxes fund a huge war chest that can then be used to afford to buy affordable housing. And I think Luther mentioned this yesterday, but on a much higher level, amending the federal revenue code to prohibit deductibility of mortgage interest for second homes might be a good idea.
One observation and a question. It's a hard question, I think. I'm 43 years old. I'm the peak of the boomer population. In the next 20 years, there will be an increasing number of baby boomers retiring. I don't remember the exact figure, but in that 20-year period, the boomers are estimated to be inheriting something like $13 trillion of wealth from their parents that are passing on. It's an enormous amount of liquidity into the marketplace, and a lot of that liquidity will go to second homes and to this, real estate essentially. So the question is, what do we do about that? One thing I see is it really speaks to the need to keep an eye on the whole inheritance tax issue at the federal level. But your observations and Jim's.
I used to be on the Whitefish City Council, and we would see a lot of different developments, and some of them, of course, were very high-end. And you'd get these spiels from the developers, and one thing you would often hear is this development is not going to contribute any children to your school. And when I was hearing someone else comment, it immediately set up a red flag, or it should for you, that if you hear that from someone, that means they're not going to contribute to their community, they're not going to live there, they're not going to be members of your community. And you really need to delve deeper into what the real type of development you're going to get if they're not going to be sending kids and being part of your community. So residential, we really need to have that.
I just wanted to add that Aspen School District, the population peaked in 1982 and has been in decline ever since, and they bus students in to attend the Aspen schools.
I've always had a secret theory that the watershed event for Aspen was direct flights in and an instrument landing system, because until that time it was pretty hard to get to, and you didn't just drop in for the weekend. And I wonder if there might be something to be said for that theory.
Are you here, Roger Brown? Roger, I have a little difference of opinion. He lives near the Eagle Airport, and I think we should shut our airport down, and Eagle should become the major airport for Vail and Aspen. But you're right. It's a strange phenomenon that that airport is getting more and more popular. There now people can fly all the way from Europe in their Gulfstream to Aspen, and with about a 10-minute drive be at their house. And that just fuels a whole new international market, which is not beneficial to the community.
One of the previous questioners asked if you had any codes that were problematic in your town. And I want to tell you what happened to me there back in the 90s. I had written some books about urban design. And so they brought me in for a talk at the Wheeler Opera House, and I spent the whole day with the planning department people. And it's a wealthy town, so they had a huge staff, you know, like 20 people. Their pick of the best graduates from the best planning schools. And, you know, and I asked a lot of questions. One of the things that was interesting was they had an incredibly stupid regulation, which was that no building in downtown Aspen could interfere with the views of the other existing buildings, which basically meant you couldn't build the kind of buildings that would give you affordable housing. You know, you had a height restriction that wouldn't allow you to build buildings that had apartments over the stores so that the waiters would have someplace to live. You know, and so this caught my attention. I asked them about it, and I said, you know, what's the deal with this? And they said, oh, well, you should be able to have a view of the mountain from every window in town. And, you know, that showed to me, a very interesting psychological aspect of the problem, which was, you know, the people in the planning department didn't know the difference between urban amenity and scenery. You know what I'm saying? You know, urban amenity means that you make provision for a lot of things in your town, like places for people to live, places for service people to live. It's not just about scenery, but for them it was all about scenery. And that prevented you from building any of the buildings that were consistent with the historic fabric of the town after a certain point, and that's why you didn't do it. Now, I don't know if you changed it, but when I actually mentioned this at my talk in the Opera House, the audience pretty much assailed me for suggesting that there was anything wrong with that. And so I decided that they had only themselves to blame for their problems.
You're no doubt right about that. We do have ourselves to blame, and I remember all that. One of the great attractions of Aspen is the Victorian town, and that worked against us on that very matter. And now they're going up some, but they're not requiring the top floors to be employee housing. And a lot of the developers have come in and said, look, we want to remodel this old building here, like the Mother Lode building. And the only way we can remodel it, even though we're getting $100 a foot rent downstairs to justify it, we have to have a free market unit up above, which then sells for an elaborate amount. Very foolish and unnecessary and sad. So some of that's happened, and the last city council was talked into some of that, which is unfortunate. But it has not brought a lot of life back into the town.
John, Cindy, I have a few things to say. I'm the Pickens County Community Development Director, and I met you back in the 90s. And actually, we took a walk together, and I was one of the people probably following you around. But I think Aspen has a lot to offer, quite frankly. As the County Community Development Director, I won't try to speak to the infill kinds of issues that you're talking about because I don't really have much to do with that. But there is a scale, and there's a human scale, and there's something that people really
come to and flock to when you have that human scale. I was noticing it today in the market here when I thought we had quite the discussion about that. What makes Missoula so special to people like myself who are visiting? And it's that human scale. It's a thing that brings people together, that makes it a community and makes people want to get out and do good things, grow good food, come together, bring their babies to the market, bring their strollers, and have a sense of community that probably helps one another out. Not in defense of, believe me, I'm pro-density. I've been trying to put density into the urban growth boundary of Aspen for a long time. The same kind of methods, and I believe the same thing that you believe in. But there's a lot of people here talking today about the ruin of Aspen, and while John is making some really wonderful points about Aspen and the mistakes that have been made, I think there's a lot to be learned from our experience because we are at such an extreme. There are amazing things that we've done in terms of the regulations, in terms of the land use regulations that I think a lot of people can learn from. Our impact fee analysis, our studies on large homes and the impacts that those create that then can translate into whatever works for you as individual communities. And I do believe in very homegrown community regulations. Because that's what will work. So I just have to say, in defense of Aspen, there's a lot of great regulations out there. And yes, John is correct in that it didn't go far enough. And I think that's what we're here to learn. No, there weren't regulations back in the 70s that said a house had to be a certain size. But now, yes, we do have those through a lot of struggle. No, they don't go far enough, but they're what the leap our community could make. So I just encourage you now, if you see your community emerging, to put some of those hard issues to task and work on those today, because the pressures will be there. And the ghost town that we may see today in Aspen in some of the neighborhoods, it's not going to stay that way. The gentleman, Brett, who talked about the baby boom, we have studies that are showing that people are moving into those homes. I think it's something like 20% of our second homeowners have owned their homes for over 20 years, and it's totally their goal to move there. And I think the real pressures are going to come when everybody actually does move there, because we're not used to having people there year-round in terms of our services. So the evolution of these communities, it's amazing. You just really have to be on top of the next issue, not the issue that you see right in front of you. You have to be one step ahead or two steps ahead. So anyway, for what it's worth, thank you.
Don't go away. I'll just say something about Cindy. She's the Pitkin County Community Planning Director, not the City of Aspen. And one of the flaws, and she's done a wonderful job, and she's introduced a TDR program that's preserving a lot of open space in the county, transfer of development from the county down. They've done a lot of wonderful things. And sure, I'm calling for some tighter rules and regulations, but with regards to like the TDR program, which I think is great, I think it would work about 3 times better if it was possible if the City of Aspen would acknowledge it. They benefit tremendously from it, but they won't accept any TDRs in the town and think it's not their business. You want to comment on that?
I do. It's just because we were so successful in the TDR program that the City of Aspen started using a TDR program to do other things. They said, we're not going to take your TDRs, we're going to use the TDRs we can generate to preserve our historic buildings or to keep those, densities at the human scale. So you have to really work together regionally and across jurisdictional lines to make the whole picture work. But I think that if you don't have a TDR program today and you want to have a TDR program or some sort of a preservation program, you really do need to work with the cities as well as the regional larger jurisdictions like counties. And
a TDR is a transferable development right and is an advanced planning tool to concentrate growth where a city has decided it should go rather than allow the sprawl.
I'll just explain how it works. If you protect more or less 35 acres in the country, that converts to 2,500 square feet of build right. So it's a kind of a unique concept that might work in your town. You might want to come down and visit Cindy. All of you.
I just wanted to ask Cindy, How many employee housing units are there in Pitkin County and in Aspen now?
There's roughly 2,800. And if you look at, and those are all within the urban growth boundary area of the town, city of Aspen. And if you look at the permanent population, which is roughly about 6,800 to 7,800 people now in that urban growth boundary area of Aspen, you look at 2,800 units, if you will. Some are small studios, some are full-blown 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom kind of homes. That's a pretty good percentage of our community. And John was right. It's really interesting in our local elections these days because many people are, you know, when you look at the political sides of the issues, people argue that all the people in affordable housing are who are going to be making all the decisions, and, you know, why not? They're the residents. So it's an interesting twist.
Yeah, just a comment or comments from you about what you think of the appreciation really started with the downzoning when the exclusivity was there. I mean, you've got the problems that Aspen's got, but you don't have Edwards, and you don't have Eagle Vale, and you don't have you know, what did Chris call it, a truck stop resort. You've got a place that's exclusive. So how do you balance downzoning the county and limiting growth to a certain percentage? If you look at Boulder, Boulder did the same kind of thing to the great benefit of the citizens of Boulder, but the citizens of Longmont and Westminster and Lafayette and others, you know, that's I think a cry for, or an indication that we need to think regionally about these problems, and Aspen or Pitkin County can't act unilaterally to downzone and basically push the working class in the process. One of the unintended consequences is that folks that worked in Aspen, like my family, we lived in Carbondale because that's where we could afford to buy a house.
Couldn't agree with you more. We really need to never realign county lines. I mean, we got 3 counties in our valley, and it should be determined by the drainage. Somehow, though, I don't think that the downzoning necessarily drove prices up like people always say. I mean, you get a really attractive place, and people are going to want to go there when they discover it.